So I'm a professor, so I have to start with a quote. And guess what? I found the quote. I was digging into one that we all know about, which is that, I don't know who invented water, who first identified water, but I know it wasn't a fish, is one that I'm familiar with. And I started digging out, and I found one of the first instances of that, which was actually in Japan, amazingly enough, by Count Hayashi in 1909. It was reported by an American. And what he said was, fish do not see water, nor do polar bears feel the cold. People do not think anything which has been happening daily in their own immediate surroundings ever since their infancy can possibly be worthy of notice. So in a way, that's really what I want to do today, is to bring up in for discussion and a little provocation something that has actually always been in the value engineering or value management landscape, but which hasn't been the explicit focus of discussion. It's related to ideas. Obviously, in value engineering, value management, we're focused on creating designs or creating products that are based on ideas. And we know that recently, certainly in the last 20 years or so, this whole idea of working with ideas more intensely has become very important. And we also have another quote, ideas are the currency of the new economy. So that's been out there. The question I have, or that I want to pose, is, what makes value engineering useful across the globe? Because it's useful, not just in a few locations, it's useful everywhere. And we can see from this list that, we have substantial and important value engineering organizations, across the globe. But they all seem to work fairly well. And facilitated VE or VM projects seem to be successful across all these different cultures. And it's sort of obvious to us. We don't really question that, which is what I intend to bring out today. So I'm going to discuss three paradoxes. I'm not going to show you what they are until I discuss them, because I know what you guys would be spending all your time thinking hard about the paradoxes and disagreeing with me. So I'm going to lead us into them a bit slowly here. So paradox one is, and if you think about this as true, the design process is mainly an idea destruction process. We think about the other part because it also is an idea creation or idea use process, but really mostly what it is an idea destruction process, because we have many more ideas than actually can be mobilized and used. So we have to discard or get rid of most of the ideas that come into it. A little graphic example of this is any one person that comes into a situation has, more than one idea. We have, for almost everything we do, we'll probably have a couple of ideas, maybe a lot more than that. So when you start bringing in more people, the number of ideas goes up much faster than the number of people. And part of this discussion is to raise the idea of our current concern with DEI, diversity and inclusion. I always forget what the E is, but my bad.
It's equity.
So as we bring in, what is it?
Equity.
Equity, yeah, okay. Which was one of the first ones. I can't believe I forgot that. So I'm focusing on diversity here. As we bring in more people, we get more ideas. And we know that. Okay, that has been part of the core of VE, since it was first developed. It's more people, more ideas. In the current environment, we're bringing in more people that fundamentally, or that we believe, are going to have ideas that are different in kind than some of the ideas we've experienced. The value engineering process has always dealt with a diversity of ideas. So this is not a paradox. This is something we've always known that we do, but I want to raise it as an issue here in a slightly different context. For the most part, we think of the diversity of ideas as just the ideas that different engineers would have or different participants, but we're coming into an environment where we're injecting people that may be different than on other bases. So the number of diverse ideas we have could be going up quite fast. And when we start bringing more people in, the number of ideas that are actually on the table at any time just potentially can become explosive. And yet the result is we actually need one answer. Now, obviously, I'm cutting it, I'm cheating a little bit. Not just one answer comes out. Sometimes it's a complex or sophisticated answer or several answers. Nonetheless, if you look at what the graphic is intending to suggest to you, is that we are going to start the process with a tremendous number of ideas, and we're going to end up with a fairly small number of ideas. And that is the paradox. Okay, we focus on the result that we get, which is we come out with a good idea that people agree with. And we don't stop to think, well, what happened to all of those other ideas? The ones that we got rid of and abandoned and ignored? Well, they, probably some of them are still good ideas. They'll live, to come into a different project. But for the current environment that we're in our discussion, they are a place where hostility and conflict can be created, because anytime you ignore somebody's ideas, then you have the possibility of conflict. And more diversity means more people's ideas are going to get ignored, destroyed, or sidelined. This creates the option of some kind of conflict. So what we have is, the possibility of us or somebody creating resentment is going up all the time, because we're injecting a larger, increased volume of ideas of different character. Right? And so the possibility of conflict then gets higher and higher in a diverse environment. This is well known. There's a lot of research, not in engineering or design, but there's a lot of research in the diversity field, looking at how to help diverse groups resolve conflict. This is well known. There's consultants, wall-to-wall consultants out there. What I want to bring to the table is, in value engineering, or rather in facilitated value engineering, we have a special tool that actually, it's a complementary tool that will assist a diverse environment to actually come to a good conclusion the way we've always done it. So it's not that this is something new we have to think about. I'm just trying to be provocative and say, what facilitated VE has always been doing, it's always been dealing with diverse environments. Now we just have maybe to stop and think a little bit more to say, we might actually be more valuable, than the past, because the environments are getting to be even more diverse. And conflict is definitely a possibility. And yet we have a tool here that by its nature actually reduces conflict, not directly, as I'll get to. So, value engineering is not a conflict reducing tool. So it's not a direct answer, but it's a solution method and a thinking method that directly assists or supports people dealing with a diverse environment. And here we have, the situation is, the more ideas that get sidelined, the more potential problems you have in a poorly run environment. So the test is, if you have a design process going, is when someone's idea gets eliminated in the process, if they agree with that, then you have a good process. And in a facilitated VE process, probably most people agree that, when their idea is sidelined, they're probably in agreement that, right now, for what we're doing, this is correct. My idea needs to go by the wayside, because VE by its nature creates a type of thinking that allows the participants both to trust the process, but also gives them a logical basis for looking at certain ideas and saying, no, we don't want to do that now, or we want to modify that. So every culture, if we're talking about cultural diversity, for instance, has unique problems in communication. They're all different, and they all, all cultures do some stuff that's really smart and some stuff that everyone else thinks is really dumb, and in a fairly unique way. So, some cultures are more aggressive, some more subservient. I grew up in the United States. I've lived in Canada for 30 years, but my current belief is that Americans are much more aggressive than Canadians. And so that is a characteristic that would need to be managed in the American environment as a tendency, and it's not everyone, but it's a tendency to slip from an even keel to aggression fairly fast, you know. Whereas my experience in Canada is the opposite. In fact, my experience in Canada is probably we're not aggressive enough. We stay a little bit too subservient, even when we probably should be pushing back. So the lack of aggression, and aggression is probably not the right word. I should probably use a word like assertiveness. I don't know if aggression's ever good, but being assertive or clear could be good. So, in some cultures, people are reluctant to reveal their thinking. Some cultures, they're reluctant to challenge ideas. So we have a mix out there. And one thing I've heard from value engineering practitioners is they're very familiar, especially those who work in the international realm. They're very familiar with working with people from multiple cultures simultaneously. There'll be some people from Arabic cultures, French cultures, and British cultures on an engineering project in the Middle East. Okay, and we have a colleague that mentioned a couple of projects like that. So, what is it about value engineering that allows a facilitated VE project to deal with some of these cultural differences and, in effect, not even notice it, right? Because if you listen to the VE practitioners who facilitate these projects and talk to them, they're focused on the project, and they rarely will raise the issue of a specific cultural problem. Okay? There's something about VE that gives it a skill or a competence in actually compensating for these cultural issues, even though it's not directly focused on them, which I think is a strength of VE. Because one thing I have, and I believe I teach my students, is no matter what you tell people, like in a business, if you're giving an instruction and you say, okay, COVID's here, you guys have to wear masks, or you're going to have to get vaccinated, or not, or whatever you're going to say, or you guys have to start wearing seatbelts anytime you're in a company truck. No matter what you tell people, a minimum of 20% will totally reject it, no matter what it is, no matter what the guidance is. If there's science or no science, as soon as you give an instruction, there will be pushback at a noticeable level. And so that is related to, I think, one of the competencies of VE is somehow it's able to work without pushing people in a way that they react back. It allows a higher proportion of people to go along with the project, because it's not directive. It allows people to run, the facilitator would typically allow the group to run itself, so people aren't being pushed. And that way you don't get the reaction of the pushback. And this has been true from the earliest days. Okay. And everyone knows this, except what the discussion is usually on the path, the successful path. How do we go to the next step? How do we end up with a good design? I'm just focusing on something that I believe has been true as long as I've known about it. Even though I am not a VE practitioner, I am more a student and observer. Facilitated VE, and here's the point I want to make, and it's a word that you probably don't hear at a lot of VE value management presentations. Facilitated VE keeps the participants focused on a transcendent goal. That's a real nerd word, a geek word, and it has a giant definition, as you can see. Let me cut down to just a little piece of the definition. So something that's transcendent, just sticking with definition one, is something that's beyond or above the range of normal or merely physical human experience. It's sort of mystical. If you stop and think about it for a minute, when you come up with the basic function of an object, in effect, you're creating something that is super important and almost mystical. So transcendent might be too tough a word, it might be too dramatic a word to use here, but the concept of coming up with a basic function and the function analysis creates a system that people can believe in something that seems to be so important that it's not challengeable, and it's not something being forced on them. It's more of an observation that they come to with other people. And I think that in effect it becomes like this transcendent goal, meaning a goal that they don't challenge, so it doesn't get pushback. And VE does it because when you develop a function in a group, you're creating something now that is this super high level goal. And the goal is mainly created by function analysis. There are a couple of pieces here. One, that constraint in function analysis of using the verb noun phrasing, it's a constraint that's in our system. We just, Larry Miles, Lawrence Miles, whoever, they just made that up, right? It seemed to make sense, but if you don't go back, it's not scientifically proven, but it works really well. And one of the things it does is it leads to a very high level of shared precision of understanding, because it constrains everyone's thinking in a certain way. So the level of shared meaning is going to be very high with function analysis, and then the function itself becomes transcendent. So what the facilitator does is keeps this going, right? If you just had a bunch of people, on their own doing VE, they could get lost, they could drift away and stop using the verb noun constraint, or they could stop being focused on the functions itself and start having sort of side discussions. The facilitator is the person that actually keeps the cows, keeps the cows going in the same direction, or has heard the cats, by keeping a focus on the use of the language that creates the shared precision. And it keeps the function analysis sort of top of mind. It keeps it as a transcendent object. Having those two things allows the group to avoid some of those cultural and other communications traps that people can get locked in. And I think the beautiful part is it doesn't do it directly. So you're not going into anyone and saying, you have to be good, you have to you have to treat everyone equally. You have to think about gender, you have to think about race or ethnic background. Notice it avoids all of that, yet it keeps the conversation going by creating something that is perceived to be important and a high degree of shared meaning. So keeping the focus on the goal is really important to allowing people to trust the process itself, mainly because in facilitated VE, the group feels that it created the goal, or mostly, cutting a few corners on that, but most people in the group will have the feeling that they were either contributing or primarily creating the goal itself. And so then trust goes up. So that's another part of the facilitated VE process, is by keeping the focus in the right place, trust can be increased. And so another issue here is actually VE is not consensus seeking, it's goal seeking. Consensus is a byproduct or a tool that's used, but the main aim of VE is to solve the problem, to design a product, to come up with the answer. The consensus is a sideline, which is another big benefit, because in methods that are aimed at consensus seeking, they also provoke reaction by people. Like if you're using Delphi method or some of the other consensus development methods, I have seen a number of times people reject against the concept that they're being told they need to seek consensus. Now, in a facilitated VE, the goal of the facilitator is to get consensus, and there's a generalized feeling that it's necessary, but for the most part, it's not forced. Okay, the consensus should grow on its own. People are not directed to say you must seek consensus. So this is another strength of VE in the diverse environment, is that in fact it stays focused on the goal, and it doesn't have these side goals of telling people, oh, you have to work on achieving consensus. So So the goal is a solution, not a consensus, with another strength. And even though the solution is arrived at through consensus, it is the solution that is the target. And if you don't have consensus, you can still get an answer. Okay, so there is definitely a possibility in a facilitated VE project that total consensus is not reached, but yet a workable solution is still reached. And in that case, from what I've heard, I've not experienced this directly, even the people who are not in the consensus still usually agree that the solution is a reasonable one. It may not be the one that they would prefer, but they can see that it does have value itself. So it doesn't create that friction. So paradox 3 is value engineering can be a very strong support for our current social DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, actually because it doesn't focus on reducing the diversity of ideas. It focuses on benefiting from the diversity of ideas. And it doesn't directly ask people to think about these difficult issues. Because when you provoke people, or when you direct people to be better, when you ask people, let's think about gender issues, race, whatever, you're going to get 20% pushback just, based on human psychology. And so VE, one of its strengths, I believe, is that it doesn't ever directly say to people, you need to, do this. You need to treat people in a different way. You will have to treat people in a different way to get to your solution. But by focusing on the solution, it doesn't provoke the resistance like some of the direct methods do, especially some of the work group methods that equity groups use, where they try and do sensitivity training. Sensitivity training, in my experience, always provokes a backlash in a certain portion of the participants, which, from what I hear, like as I said, I'm not a VE practitioner, more of a student and an observer. When I talk to people who are VE practitioners, they don't report much, if any, pushback to the process once it starts. They do report that there can be pushback before people get into it, but they don't report continuing pushback. In fact, the reverse. They usually report that some of the naysayers actually get on board more than you would expect from sensitivity training, which in general does provoke a fair amount of resistance. So in a way, facilitated VE protects ideas and people. And we can see, if you look in the DEI literature, there's a lot of studies that show that increased diversity can definitely lead to increased conflict. This is from Forbes. It says, for a poorly managed team, on the other hand, increased diversity can have an adverse effect on the team and the organization. In addition, research has found that conflict related to increased diversity also takes a toll and reduces employee creativity, which is one of the important things we need for almost all VE activities. Is we need employee creativity. And when you have diversity related conflict, there have been several studies, the one that they're referring to is out of Cornell, showing that it actually takes a toll on creativity because people become reluctant to expose themselves. And being creative means you have to expose yourself. You have to open yourself to criticism. It's an opening, in effect, to reveal your creativity. If you have tension, you reduce that. So my assertion, based on this discussion, I've taken, I haven't taken a huge amount of time to go through this, but I believe most of what I said would be things that a lot of practitioners would realize they have seen, even though, like I mentioned, they usually talk about the other side of it, the process through to the good end, rather than thinking a lot about all the ideas that get abandoned. But I would assert that facilitated VE, and I notice I stress the facilitated part. I think that is essential to have CVSs and other facilitators, because they're the people that keep the focus on the target, keep the focus on the goal, that transcendent goal, keep the language clear, and that's what allows the trust to build. But I would say it's an excellent complementary tool that supports diverse contests. That's a giant typo I just noticed. supports diverse contexts. No matter what the source of diversity, this is huge because VE has always dealt with diversity. In the beginning, it was diversity of different vocational groups, different engineers. And then as it matured, or, as you went through different years, and I'm talking about the 60s, had engineers plus managers plus other people. And notice it's the norm now for VE practitioners to want the most diverse group possible. So you've already got the experience and the desire to have the diversity. In general, in the past, we've just mainly thought about diversity of background and concepts. But notice that it handles all diversity: race, gender, cultural, vocational, education. VE is sort of neutral to what type of diversity it handles. And that's related to that third slide that I showed, which shows that we have substantial and effective VE, VM organizations across every country, and they appear to be equally effective. And even more important, a lot of our VE practitioner colleagues who work in especially engineering projects in international spheres, I think, particularly in Europe or in Asia, where you will, and Middle East rather is what I meant to say, where you'll end up with people from multiple cultural backgrounds. I've talked to, I ask them a lot, about how this goes. They don't report that the cultural backgrounds are a problem. So I think VE actually has a particular and unique competence at handling all forms of diversity that make it a perfect complementary tool to talk, in organizations, and something that we should talk about. So it's something that we should communicate as you go forward in your consulting or in our internal training or our website for Value Analysis Canada, that actually we are potentially one of the most important tools to support a lot of these social ideas that are running through society now. That is all I wanted to say. I think I could take some questions. I know I could take some questions.